Heteronormativity is responsible for the whitewashed and straightwashed way we often see the 1950s. However, in downtown Los Angeles, a far different scene was taking place. It's important to be aware of the social, political, and economic climate in America during the 1950s. In 1952, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders was first published by the American Psychiatric Association. Almost unanimously, homosexuality was included as a mental disease. Also, employment was nearly impossible for the queer community. In 1953, Dwight Eisenhower's Executive Order 10450 reinforced the ban of homosexuality in federal jobs. Private employers followed in his lead. It was a well-known fact that you could easily be fired if it was found out that you were gay. This led to a situation where all sexual deviants outside of the heteronormative standard were literally pushed out of mainstream society, and in the case of Southern California, they were pushed into downtown. It's also important to note that in the 1951 court case Stallman v. Riley, California became the first state where gay bars could legally operate. This led to an influx in gay bars in the downtown Los Angeles area. Two of the most popular gay bars in downtown Los Angeles were Harold's and the Waldorf. Situated in between them was a small coffee shop that was open all night long and soon became a popular hangout for the queer community. This coffee shop was called Cooper's Donuts. Similar to Compton's Cafeteria and the Tenderloin, Cooper's Donuts became a place where the queer community, street queens, and hustlers could come together late at night. It was also one of the only places where transgendered women felt safe and comfortable going. However, Cooper's Donuts wasn't entirely a safe space.
In the first place, a great number of those people came from areas in the country where they were much further dislocated, much more seriously dislocated than they are here. They came in and flooded a community that wasn't prepared to meet them, despite the fact that we got all this relief money going in there. We didn't ask these people to come here.
During the 1950s, the LAPD, led by William H. Parker, made it their mission to harass and interrogate the queer community. Since cross-dressing was illegal, they often targeted downtown gay bars. This was part of the reason why many trans people hung out at Cooper's Donuts. Neighboring gay bars often wouldn't let them in for fear of being raided. The LAPD also used a tactic called entrapment, where they would send undercover cops in as gay men into queer spaces to arrest people. The LAPD wasn't just sexist, they were racist too. William Parker, who came to be known as Wild Bill Parker by the queer community, also targeted African American and Latino communities, which also happened to reside in downtown LA. Confront and command. Control the streets at all times. Always be aggressive. Stop crimes before they happen. Seek them out. Shake them down. Make that arrest. These were the instructions Parker gave to his police force, and under his command, Cooper's Donuts became an easy target. But one night, in May of 1959, people had had enough. On that night, two cops barged into Cooper's Donuts, checking IDs of all the customers. If the gender on their ID didn't match the gender they were dressed as, then they were arrested. This led to 5 individuals being placed in the back of a police cruiser. This night, the community in Cooper's Donuts decided that enough was enough. The entire coffee shop erupted in riot. All of the customers used whatever they had in the coffee shop, donuts, cups, silverware, chairs, to throw it at the 2 police officers until they were forced to retreat and call for backup. The patrons poured into the street, and those arrested burst from the police car. They continued to riot. A truly raw and unplanned moment of collective resistance. Main Street was shut down for the entire following day. Of the rioters that night, the most famous was nationally acclaimed Mexican-American author John Rechy, who was the first in documented history to speak about the riot in an interview in 2005. He also recounted the events of that night in his novel, City of Night. If it wasn't for him, we may never know about the riot at Cooper's Donuts in May of 1959, the first known instance of the queer community fighting back against police brutality. When asked to describe the homosexual world in the late 1950s, he had this to say: "Our history is either not being recorded or it's not being grasped. That is something I feel keenly about. Our history is being shoved into a can, as it were. The raids back then, the police making arrests, people today don't think about that. For me, it's sacred to remember our background and resistance long before Stonewall. For me, people who say everything changed after Stonewall is just plain nonsense. There were a lot of rioters in New York then and happened to report it. There were other places that had riots. I really resent the business that everything prior to Stonewall was repressive. That's nonsense. Even the queens to go out and drag, they were still being defiant. Just being gay was defiant. Although the riot at Cooper's Donuts was small in scope and reputation in comparison to others, it is wildly important in queer history and shouldn't be ignored. Not only was it the first documented uprising of the queer community against police brutality in modern history, but in a revolutionary way, it included all members of the LGBT community. As Susan Stryker puts it in her book Transgender History, it demonstrates the overlap between gay and transgender activism in the working class districts of major U.S. cities in spite of tensions and prejudices within both groups. Also, the ethnical diversity of Southern California has always been an interesting phenomenon. Downtown and Broadway during the 1950s became primarily African American and Latino areas. For one of the first documented times in modern history, an interesting intersection of race and sexuality took place here. Downtown LA during 1959 became a bustling fringe area where the city's poor lived and slept on streets and in hotels. It was home to poor and ethnically diverse sexual deviants, hustlers, prostitutes, and patrons buying their services. These were the people that rioted that night, and it's shocking, and yet somehow not so shocking, that we don't talk about it more in historical discussion. After the riot at Compton's cafeteria, a historical marker was placed in the Tenderloin, but no such thing has been erected for Cooper's Donuts. Different sources tell different stories of what happened to the old site. One account says it has become the ground floor of a metropolitan building. Another says it's now a Dunkin' Donuts. Whatever the case, there seems to be no significant physical reminder of the events that night. Without John Recchi, we may never even have heard of it. But now that we know, it's our job to make sure that the riot at Cooper's Donuts is no longer lost in history.